Hello, my name's Nicholas Flood. I'm the Managing Director for IBM in Australia, and I'm extending a very warm welcome today to a very special guest to this IBM Policy Lab event. Chris, I'd like to start with, would you be able to introduce yourself and the really important work and role that you perform for the Australian Government?
Hi Nick, and thanks for having me here today. So my name's Chris Fechner, and I'm the current Chief Executive of the Digital Transformation Agency, which is the agency within the Commonwealth Government that's responsible for the strategy, policy and investments around digital governments for Australia. So this is the role that is really about bringing about the transformation in digital for government so that we're able to support the needs of both our citizens and our businesses, but also within government that we streamline ourselves to be a public service that's ready for the digital age and capable of delivering effective services to all of our constituents. I'm also the head of the digital profession within the Commonwealth Government, which gives me an additional responsibility, and one of the areas I really love, around making sure we have the right digital capabilities to support that outcome for people and businesses of being able to work really effectively for access to services, information and delivery of those things that are necessary to grow Australia as a successful country.
Chris, I'm eager to learn too around what are the key challenges that you see facing indeed the Australian Government and all governments seeking to transform the digital experience.
Complexity, government itself, I think, Nick, is often there. Governments have evolved over a long time. 4,500 years ago, I think, we had those first Byzantine sort of models where they were building up government and bureaucracy came in. And we've got all these things that have created constructs of government that are really silo-based. They're functionals. We've got border control, we've got health, we've got social services, we've got education. People don't experience those things in the structure of government. They experience those things through their normal day-to-day lives. So I think one of the big challenges is government's evolved into silos, whereas citizens and businesses expect government to be a single enterprise. So working across government rather than down governments is one of our really monstrous challenges. The second one is really quite interesting because Australia was a very early adopter of technology, really, really early. And I think it's something to do with our geographical isolation, but also, and I think that drives us as to be a slightly more innovative country. We really invested heavily in ICT and digital and data early, and we've built up these massive portfolios. And unfortunately, where we are now is some of those portfolios are reaching their age. And we're sitting in an environment now where we have a lot of things that we would consider to be legacy, but they're critical for functioning still. We have to think how we can actually move forward safely, reducing the risk of that legacy, but giving us new capabilities. And if you look at some new economies where they've been able to skip that legacy bit and move to really contemporary skills, even some of those countries have jumped in front of us in those things. So our job now is to think how we change our mindset, change our thinking to adapt to modern contemporary digital capabilities using data extensively while not breaking apart the foundation that made us successful early in that space.
Really considered answer, Chris. One contribution I'd make, around the world, IBM is seeing the emergence of hybrid cloud and the complexity being such that no one platform has all of the answers. In the Australian Government's context, specifically in context to hybrid, how are you seeing that as presenting advantages or disadvantages?
Yeah, I think it's critical. So multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, cloud services, these are the things that are actually taking away some of the complexity. So small agencies, large agencies can use cloud in exactly the same way, whereas historically, where we've managed our own infrastructure and platform capabilities, that's meant that big agencies were the only ones that could really scale and do that effectively, which meant that we had different levels of services that we could define. And I think the other aspect that cloud is supporting us with is it stops us having to do everything. It starts us at the 50% mark, 60% mark, even sometimes the 80% mark, where we can take on a software as a service or a platform as a service or even infrastructure as a service that completely de-risks that aspect of our environment and allows us to concentrate on those things that are the differentials. Whereas I think if you talked 15 years, 10 years ago even, we were talking about how we build data centres and how we have the right kilowatt capabilities to support all the servers and the cooling we needed. Those things are actually fun for digital nerds such as myself, but they don't actually create value for people and businesses. So cloud is that sort of revolution more than evolution that sort of changes the mindset from being a technology manager to being a services integrator, a presenter of capabilities to the people that need it most.
Fantastic answer, Chris. Very much in line with what we're observing around the world. Chris, I'm interested to explore the theme of partnership and specifically technology partnerships and the value that they're bringing or otherwise to the Australian government.
This is something I think we've really tried to drive forward. Government for a very long time has been very conscious that it was thinking about how it needed to do everything for itself. We live in a world that is largely borderless now because of technology, and understanding how our partners can bring forward their global experience, their global capabilities against a whole different variety of different problem spaces, but then use that experience to apply them to the context of government means that we can actually start and do things much more effectively because we're not trying to research or discover every answer ourselves. We can go to great partners to be able to help us with things like, you've been working in 20 jurisdictions across different areas. Surely you see the same things that we're having now. And by bringing that experience into our field, which otherwise doesn't exist, we're able to, again, I mentioned before that some countries have been able to short circuit that sort of legacy to modern contemporary services. They can only do that because of the fact that somebody else has experienced those things but led forward. And I think this partnership model is exactly the same. We can actually use it to leverage those experiences. But I think another really important part of that is the fact that when we've got technology that's rapidly evolving and changing so quickly, we have this situation where government does not have the depth or capability to keep up with that change all by itself. So having good relationships and trusted relationships with partners, and I'll talk about partners different from vendors in that space, is that we can actually understand without the risk of having to invest in all of those technologies ourselves, which ones are going to give us value in their application of government and which ones aren't. And we can do that with partners. We can do that in quite a safe way in that my big difference between partner and vendor is one will want you to buy something before they share something with you, whereas a partner will be seeking to understand how the value is created before there goes into a contract. So those aspects of emerging technology, greater use of data, experience with other clients across the globe mean that partnerships give government an extension on itself to do more and create more capability than it could otherwise do on its own. We had situations during fires and floods in the Commonwealth where we had to scale out so elastically, way beyond any of the contractual considerations of those environments. And because of the whole of government contract and because of our partner relationship, we're able to really use that to expand out on things that would have otherwise taken months and even years to actually contractually sort out. So that part about the opportunity to respond really quickly to emergencies, and obviously within COVID we had exactly the same sort of scenario. We had to rapidly expand our service delivery in the online environment, and we had to be able to do that in a way that was absolutely bulletproof to make sure that we got through those things. And the last part that I think is really important in that aspect is partners like IBM that have got really big technology revolutions and evolutions coming through, being able to understand how we can apply those in the space is so important. And that helps us make our environments more secure, more agile, and more effective for the people and citizens that we support. And it makes sure that we're contemporary with the rest of the world.
Thank you, Chris. To double down on a particular point you made, you spoke about the value that's been unlocked through aligning all of the Commonwealth behind one contractual vehicle and one agreement. Could you talk to the key points that you drew upon in actually aligning those individual agencies so that they could see there was more value in a collective outcome rather than going it alone?
I think, Nick, we did have to start with the old initial one about what's in it for me. So they had some needs, and IBM is used for a lot of critical capabilities across the Commonwealth. So preserving those was always going to be paramount in a whole of government decision. But I think what we actually saw is the flexibility that we got in those contracts. We could get to a position where we could swap licenses, we could consolidate hardware, we could scale up in a way that we couldn't do before without a lot of additional work. So the speed with which we could act was important. I think also the Commonwealth recognised that its bargaining power collectively was much stronger than it was individually, and the recognition from IBM that they would treat the Commonwealth as a single entity for the purposes of these negotiations, but still be able to provide specific support to agencies was a key aspect in that as well. We were also very conscious of the fact that what we wanted to get in these whole of government agreements was clear and unambiguous best value propositions, because we do work in an open competitive environment, and we need to constantly demonstrate that what we're giving to the people of Australia is the best value for money possible and giving the best services that we can.
Chris. And the second point that you made earlier was around the revolutionary technologies that are either in market today or are soon to be coming. What role do the DTA play with the technologists and futurists that you have on the team in inspiring and making it aware to the other agencies what those new capabilities could deliver?
I think the DTA's role is really focused around how we apply digital within the government context. But we also see a lot of that coming from the broader economy experience. So the first thing I'd say is the DTA doesn't do it alone. We do a lot of partnership models with our departments of industry, the departments of education and skills. We do lots of work with our own research institute, the CSIRO Institute in Australia. And this is about finding those technologies and understanding their application and their appropriate use within government. So, for instance, we're doing work with lots of different areas around the use of AI. Now, we talk about ethical, we talk about transparent, we talk about explainable in those particular aspects. But we've got to think about how do we do it safely, and how do we do it securely, and how do we do it in a way that people understand that it's being used for their benefit. We have all of these positions across different technologies, cryptography and cybersecurity. We have it around sharing and use of data for particular things. So the DTA's role is to ensure that government behaves in such a way that trust and confidence in the public and the business is maintained and extended, but also that we adopt it in a way that is not so far behind that everybody's expectations haven't been met, but not so recklessly that we could create an unintended consequence of that. So the big role that the DTA has is about coordinating, about surfacing all the initiatives that come across from all across government, and we're a big and quite diverse government, and understanding how when one use case is brought up in one agency, how that might be applied more generically, and how we can actually then go to downstream aspects, even things like how do we use our arrangements with the market to actually buy those services in a way that means that when we bring them in, that all of those conditions that we were talking about, the effective and efficient and safe use of those technologies coming through are applied consistently across what is a really diverse government.
Chris, within the recently concluded IBM Whole of Australian Government Agreement, there are a number of innovation on-ramps, in particular in the field of quantum computing. Why was it important to the Australian government to have that capability included in the new agreement?
Sure, Nick. So these agreements are not just about the current commercials, they're about the future as well. And Australia really believes that there is a strong future for ourselves in quantum. So there's a lot of research going out through and supported through the Australian government on that particular space. So having access to IBM's advanced or developed capabilities in quantum gives government the opportunity to experiment with that use for application in our own areas, but it also makes sure that we're keeping up with the pack in terms of how quantum can be used to make sure that our systems are kept safe, protected from the large number of cyber attacks that are coming through. Also how government can look to use quantum to answer wicked problems that otherwise don't seem to be solved with current technology levels. So being able to get access to this stuff early and safe, without actually have to going through and going into a big, again, procurement exercise, has really helped us to think about how we can be quick, how we can experiment, and how we can train our people to understand how this next capability, which will be as paradigm shifting, I think, as the introduction of the wheel was to early man, to contemporary society.
Chris, I'm sure it's difficult to choose one example given the progress that you've made across the board, but is there one that illustrates that process from optimising for government process through to optimising for citizen experience?
Yeah, Nick, I think probably a good example of that. For all those people around the world, Australia actually experiences a really high number of natural disasters. And government responds to those natural disasters, and we've been doing that for decades. But what we've seen is, in a lot of cases in the last, say, 5 years, is just how frequently those things are happening and what severe impacts they're having on citizens and businesses in Australia. So if we go back, say, even 5 years, a lot of that was about a disaster happens, somebody goes and looks at the area afterwards and sees the impact of disasters, whether it be fire or flood, and then there is a process where people say, right, we're going to do some payments for help in recovery of these things. So they'll define a form, people will fill out the form, they'll need to compile a large amount of evidence, photos, filling in documents, writing out descriptions of the damage that's been done. They'll put those all in, and individuals would process those individual cases, and eventually, maybe 1, 2, 3 weeks afterwards, there might be a payment that goes through. But there would also be situations where paperwork got lost or those sort of things, and people didn't get the outcomes that they needed, leaving people in very vulnerable situations largely exposed. If we talk about Services Australia and the work they did in the last of most recent flooding environments, for instance, what we actually had was a system that was almost completely automated that could deal with the hundreds of thousands of applications that were coming through in almost a straight-through process, with clear understanding that the systems knew what locations were damaged, that digital capabilities allowed for easy collection of evidence. So a photo of a flood area that was actually impacted by floods. The online processes were supported and guided through all the channels, whether you went into a service centre, whether you rang up over the phone, or whether you used the digital channel alone. And you got that process in minutes. And that processing went straight through, so that within 24 hours, those people that were experiencing those natural disasters had actually relief from government to help them through that period that was most critical to them, rather than a week, a month down the track where they've had to deal with that on their own for a long time. So digital made it possible to deal with the volumes and the speed that were necessary to help all the people in their times of greatest need.
Chris, thank you very much for swinging by. It was absolutely interesting and insightful as always to hear your perspectives as a recognised global leader. On behalf of IBM, thank you.
Thanks very much, Mick.
Thank you.